Good morning, Jane. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How you doing?
Absolutely fantastic. I have been dying to talk with you because you have lived the path. And we are in a moment of journalism where it's time to share the story or somebody else is going to write it for you. And you have shared your story in No Ordinary Assignment.
I certainly have. I've dug very deep for this book.
What was that journey like? Because I'm a writer. I know what it does to the inside of my soul when it comes to putting words on a page. What was it like for you?
Well, most of my work is in TV, but I've also always been writing. I've been writing other people's stories. I write for The New Yorker, and I've been writing newspaper articles since the very early stages of my career. So I do enjoy writing, but writing about myself was hard. It is. I'm sure you've experienced this too. I mean, how do you edit your own life story? And it's been fascinating. Like I buried myself away in a library last summer to really, really, really dig deep, and I found myself kind of like walking through the corridors of my memory. And it's a fascinating experience, reliving some of these experiences, and you relive the emotions as well, for better or for worse.
I'm with you on that. Oh, there have been many times where I've stopped because the emotions were so strong, and that it's like, okay, get over it. You're going to be okay. Just get through this.
Yeah. I think when you feel that way, you're on the right track too.
Are there areas of your journey that you did not want to touch? Because I'm still having a hard time going back and reading what I wrote during 9/11, because there are so many things that we've long forgotten that took place after that it's like, it becomes too heavy to carry.
For me, from the very get-go, and I write about this in the introduction to the book, my intention was to be open and honest. Mm-hmm. And very often, that includes talking about your flaws and your mistakes and the things that make you human. So it was, it's tempting to do that. But for me, because I had set out a question at the very beginning of writing this, which was, why do I do this work? And not just, the kind of rote answer, which is true, but a little idealistic, like, well, it's a true, I want to speak truth to power. And I think that there's a tendency to talk in a way where we speak in broad strokes about the politics and the policy of what we do, but not necessarily where does it come from on a personal level. And you'll notice in the book, there's sort of like, there are two journeys. There's a very personal journey and there's a professional journey. And I didn't want to just write about my work. I wanted to write about the person who does this kind of work, because I want the public to know, we're living through an era where journalists are so often demonized or lionized as celebrities. And I just wanted them to see a real human being just doing their best.
Not only that, but these AIs are coming in really super fast. And we've got to have journalists that are going to stand up and say, no, that's an AI. Here is the real story.
And certainly that's an AI, but I'm actually there. I'm actually in that refugee camp or at that front line or in that hospital. So, I don't think, AI is it's inevitable. It will change the way information is absorbed and passed around and formed into stories. But I don't think it can really, compensate for me being there. And, I think humans want to hear stories told by humans. They can hear information told by AI, but stories are for humans.
How is it that you were able to share a story inside the book, No Ordinary Assignment, and not sound like a reporter or a journalist? I mean, you really do show some emotion inside these pages.
For me, I wasn't writing it as a journalist. I didn't want, the reader to read Jane Ferguson, PBS NewsHour, or The New Yorker. It was, I feel like I owe the reader more than that. I owe them Jane Ferguson, kid on a farm in Ireland. Jane Ferguson trying her best to save some money for college at a chicken factory. Jane Ferguson, who has no idea what she's doing, trying to use this video camera in Somalia, age 24. So I owe the audience that. And I suppose from a technical standpoint, the way I looked at it as I was writing the book was, well, what I should do is I should bring them along with me to hear and smell and feel and sense it just as I did.
Yeah.
And so to do that, I'm not speaking through the voice of hindsight. I'm not speaking as, 38-year-old Jane who's had time to think about it all. I'm trying to get them to see whether or not I'm a child asking questions about the Troubles in Ireland, or whether I'm, a youngster who just can't believe, CNN just bought her first, news story. I very much so try to speak in the voice of who I was then.
Isn't it an amazing journey? Because I mean, what happens is that, I mean, because I can still remember when I first got into broadcasting, and then where we are now. I don't ever want to go back there, because you always hear of people that want to go back. No, the experience of it all, and to be in those places. I mean, that's got to be something for you where it's like, okay, it's not a trophy, it's a mile marker, and we're going to create a chapter around this.
Exactly. I feel exactly the same way as you do. I look back, with fondness at that young woman, because you do get a little distance from yourself. I wonder if you experience that as well, where I'm watching her do this, and she's almost in the abstract. So I'm writing about her, and I'm looking back and I'm thinking, God, she was so hard on herself. And that was really hard. And she was doing her best. And I can see life as, without meaning to be too corny about it, it is a journey, and I can see it as a journey that is additive. So everywhere I'm moving, I'm learning, and I'm growing, and I'm moving. I don't look back at those years as like my heyday or where I peaked and what. I feel nostalgia, and I feel an emotional pull back to certain people and places, but I don't ever look back and think that's better than where I am. I look back and see that very much so as the road to here.
The two of us are still in that part of the story where people are starting to look at us saying, how much longer? And my answer always is, I don't have the courage to tell that 14-year-old person I was that I'm going to stop. That kid's dream is still alive in me. And it sounds like it, and I read it inside this book, that it's very much alive in you as well.
It is, so much of it throughout our journeys as journalists and as broadcasters is people presume that every decision we make as youngsters is calculated and purposeful and exactly what we wanted. They forget that we're simply doing our best with whatever very, very narrow options that we have. So, I look back at that young woman who's doing that work in the field, and I see her as someone who didn't necessarily have a lot of choices professionally. She was just doing her best. I didn't pick and choose whatever assignment, whatever news organization I wanted to work for. So the only difference I would say now is that when you do get older and you get a little more success in your career, you get the luxury of that. Yeah. So I never want to stop doing this work. I love the idea of being able to curate the stories that I do, the ability to do some writing as well as the broadcasting and the TV. I take a little bit of time out to teach as well. Mm-hmm. And I love being able to have all of these different experiences as well.
When you talk about teaching, how do you like today's modern day students? Because what I keep bumping into are people that think they're already a star because they've got a YouTube page or they're TikToking, and it's like you're not there, man. You haven't even found your voice yet.
I know. I do. I do sometimes. I am astonished because I mentor a fair bit. I talk to young reporters. I often, go off and visit college campuses around the country and talk to journalism students. And I sometimes smile to myself because I recognize, I can't be, too superior. I had that little arrogance when I was younger. I was like, I can do this. So, I recognize the attitude there, that little, like the confidence. But I do sometimes laugh because I think, you really don't know what you don't know. And once you get out into the field and everything falls through and someone pulls your visa and, your car breaks down, nothing substitutes for experience. And I do tell young people that I'm teaching that as well, that, absolutely nothing will substitute for being in the field and spending years doing the work. And one thing also that I would say for young reporters that approach me for mentoring, and as you say, there's a sense that, oh, well, I'm ready, I'm good to go. I sometimes find that they often ask for connections, and they really just want you to make a call and get them, a commission or a job. But I'm always telling them, honestly, trust me, I know it's uncool and it's not part of the culture right now.
I'm so glad that we talked about teaching, and the reason why is because in my notes here it says says no ordinary assignment. Universities and broadcasting schools need to teach this. And here we are talking about that we're both teachers, that we know what we've experienced. It doesn't belong to us. It belongs to the next generation, so they too can learn how to move through the storms.
And I very much so wrote the book with young people in mind.
Oh, man.
I was an outsider, and I didn't come out of an Ivy League school and live in a big city or have any family connections. I was just this hillbilly kid who didn't know. I didn't know how you became a television reporter. I remember someone once asking me from CNN who my agent was, and I was like, "What do you mean agent?" And so I had no idea. And so I think that's why it's important for young people to read these experiences of what it's like to actually build a career in journalism, the nuts and bolts of the challenges. And I certainly hope, young people who are less confident, who don't know how they're going to do it, would read it.
Yeah. A few minutes ago, you talked about the business side of journalism, and I want to put focus on that because you and I have gone through some changes in the past 10 to 15 years. The platforms have expanded, but business leaders have tried to own us exclusively. How did you get through that mess? Because you are everywhere, and it's like it inspires me that you are here, you are there, and because so many people say, okay, I guess I'm owned by you, I'll stay here and do nothing but this.
I have been fortunate enough throughout my career to be freelance.
Good.
So I have not, and don't get me wrong, this wasn't the master plan. When I was a kid, all I dreamed of was being anointed with the validity of being a network correspondent. And they'd hire me and give me a contract and I'd be theirs and they'd promote me. But it didn't work out that way. They didn't hire me. So I didn't quit because there was nothing else I ever wanted to do. This was my dream since I was that little girl. So I just kept going. So I ended up being blessed by that. My freelance career meant I could take the time to, spend months prepping a major story, something like getting into Yemen during the Civil War, or I could turn around and, pitch a story to the New Yorker and start writing for a magazine, or I was very fortunate. I didn't have to do shift work in between my assignments, which, by the way, can add a lot of emotional and mental pressure to journalists who just come home from a war zone. Instead of decompressing, they're back into an understaffed newsroom working 12-hour shifts or 9-hour shifts. And so I was lucky to be able to do that. In the earlier years of my career, I didn't think it was luck. I thought it was misfortune. But I look back and realize I had so much control over my career as a result.
Speaking of that decompression, boy, you bring up a great subject there because I call it post-production blues, and I also call it defragging. How do you defrag when you've been to a situation like that? Because you've got to suffer from PTSD. I have the book. I see what you've been through.
I, over the years, have massively prioritized my mental and emotional health. I'm lucky to be coming from that generation where we're not so macho about therapy or decompression anymore. I saw a lot of older reporters, those who I'd looked up to and lionized as a youngster, really struggle. And, there was a sort of certain taboo amongst that set around seeing a therapist. People were afraid that if you ever even talked about PTSD, you'd be pulled off the road. You wouldn't be given assignments anymore. So luckily that culture has changed. For me, when I come back from assignment, one thing I've learned is that I'm not detached. I'm very emotional when I'm on the road. I really, really feel a lot, but I don't feel all of it. There's a little, like there's a certain level I get to, and then I have to do my job. And so I don't try to detach. Instead, I try to stay busy. I'm not a voyeur, and I'm certainly not a tourist. I'm there I have a role to play, and I have a job that might help in some way. So that keeps me busy. And so when I come home, I'm physically exhausted beyond description. And so once I start to come down from that and I take the time, what I tend to do is I really actually make an effort to allow myself to feel the feelings that I didn't. Okay. And sometimes it involves like sitting down and actually thinking about the individual people I talked to and how desperate their circumstances were. And I actually allow myself very much so to go there again. And I've described it before as the big cry. And I often have a big cry, and it's an emotional release that's very, very important. The other thing that's worth pointing out is that, people like myself, we rely on our loved ones. We have friends who we talk to, especially within the industry, foreign correspondents, we talk to one another, we support one another, we check in on one another when we know we've been on really rough assignments. And I'm lucky to have, a partner and friends and family that really support me in that way.
I love the way that you talk about the people that you make a part of the story, because one of the things that you've become a master at is sharing the emotions of a real, honest to God person. And it reminds me so much of my own photographer when I was at WBTV, in the way that he said, he would always tell me, now I'm going to pan away from you. This isn't about you. It's about the scene. It's about the emotion. And he says, just keep doing what you're doing. Just let me do what I need to do as well. I loved my photographer. Did you have someone like that?
I've had plenty of incredible photographers, and actually who I have learned so much from. And actually, it's worth pointing out that a big part of being freelance and, working at certain news organizations has meant I've been lucky enough to work with a lot of photographers from the countries that I'm reporting on.
Oh, my God.
So, whether Afghan photographers and producers, Yemeni photographers and producers, Syrians, I've been fortunate enough to learn from them. And these are people who are living through this story to a certain extent themselves as well. So, I have learned from my colleagues that I work with in the field vastly more than anybody else. And, I think that the way you do that, as you point out there, is just doing a lot of listening, less talking, more listening, because that's the job. That's the work.
You bring something up in No Ordinary Assignment that I haven't heard in a very long time, and I want to know why it's gone away from history. The IRA. My God, that was a major part of my teenage life.
Well, major part of mine too. I grew up in probably the last Protestant village before you got, or just outside it, on a small farm, just before you got to the IRA heartlands of South Armagh, right on the border. Bandit country, they called it. I was born in 1984, so I was coming up as a kid in the 80s and 90s. And to me, and I see this on the road everywhere I go now in conflict zones, as a child, you accept everything around you as perfectly normal. Yeah. This is what everyone does. When you drive down the road, there's the army with checkpoints, and they have, automatic weapons. And this is before 9/11, whenever a lot of the Western world, didn't have military on the streets or even police with automatic weapons. Bomb scares and explosions, and the local police station blown up every few years. This was very, very normal for a kid growing up. And also, I would say, perhaps even more impactful for me was a very divided and sectarian society. I cover a lot of tribal sectarian divisions around the world, and I grew up in the middle of that.
Wow, you talk about all the traveling. Because I'm here in the South, I really do pay attention to people's accents, and you've been accused of having the wrong accent. Oh my God, talk about being put on the spot.
Well, TV news is a very fickle business. And especially when I was coming up, it's part of my personal story as well. I've always been a fish out of water. I was, I didn't really feel like I fit in this, in the area that I grew up in. I had this wanderlust. I wanted to see the world. And then, I ended up in all different places around the world where I was always trying to fit in. And when I first started to work in American TV, I was told that they didn't want foreign accents. Yep. And so, throughout my life, there have been many moments where I've changed my accent. And so, where I've had to for work. And yeah, so now it takes quite an expert ear to pick out Northern Ireland. Fairly transatlantic, I think, but still... I sometimes bump into people who say, wait, Australia. No, Canada. So it's just a part of the sort of fickleness of television, I guess.
Do you think our attraction to your stories, and the reason why the world basically kind of just comes to a halt when one of your stories happens, is because when you do your reporting, your journalist, is it because we see ourselves in the people that you're interviewing or the stories that you're sharing? It's almost like, my God, this could be me.
Sometimes, but not exclusively. I always say that my job is to remind people of other people's humanity. Yep. They don't necessarily have to see themselves in another person's situation. It can be impossible for someone to relate to someone whose children are starving in a famine. That's just unthinkable in a literal sense for a lot of people watching. But I do try to remind them that, of the humanity of another person. You may not be able to relate to their situation, but you are, perhaps a parent, or you are someone who knows that their grandparents fled war. Yep. And can remember their tales of that. So yeah, there are times when I'd really want people to relate, but I think that all that I'm trying to really put across is, humanity on the line, and not just death tolls and numbers and figures. And the best way to do that is to remind people that war is always experienced on a personal level. You sit down with someone in a refugee camp or a hospital, or even just a neighborhood under bombardment, and they don't tell you about the politicians and the geopolitics and this happened. You sit down with a kid and they'll be like, well, I don't know, the cat's missing and we can't find her, and dad went out and never came home, and there's no food in the fridge and my brother keeps crying. Like, people experience war on a personal level. And that is relatable, because anybody who has ever experienced a crisis, can see that you don't see it from this big, high up place staring down at it. You experience it in your life.
Wow. This is a must-read book, and I want listeners to know that it's called No Ordinary Assignment. To me, it's like a modern-day Western. You're out there in that Wild West, and you're getting the story, and you're bringing it back to people. It is such a great summer read.
Thank you very much.
You've got to come back to this show anytime. The door is always going to be open for you.
I would love that.
Excellent. Will you be brilliant today, okay?
You too. Thanks so much.